Okay, so welcome to our last class where we are going to kind of put everything all together and look at what could possibly be the biggest natural disaster and environmental geohazard out there. And it's kind of the most benign because it is us, meaning not exotic like a meteorite strike or some huge supervolcano eruption. We're instead looking at the fact that humans are increasing in their population through time. And we'll look at why, and we'll look at what could possibly happen. So I used to put these numbers up for population growth, the actual numbers of what is going on Earth right now. But I'm going to swap back and forth between the internet and this presentation because I'm going to show you this. This is real time what's going on with human population on Earth. And you see, these are the number of births that have happened today. You can read this, pretty self-explanatory. This is a number of people that are on Earth right now. And we do this in a certain way using mathematical models because people don't take absolute censuses or censi in every country. But these models you can have a lot more confidence in than you could in, say, a climate change model. So you see, as we're talking, these births are going up. And the main thing I want you to see about this is that there's this misconception that population is growing on Earth because people are having a lot of babies. Turns out that's not the case. The birth rate has been declining for a very long period of time. So birth rate's been going down. The situation here is that, look at the death rate now. See the deaths today? What do you notice about the rate of death versus the rate of birth? Slower, yeah, it's slower. So here's the thing, perhaps the biggest environmental disaster, environmental geohazard out there is the fact that this number is going more slowly than the births today. Because you think about how you would construct an equation, it's a very simple equation, for the number of people on Earth. And the way you would do that, we'll come back to this and see how it's changed through time, but the way that you would do that, very simple. How would you come up with an equation using these numbers or these parameters? Let's put them all out. How would you come up with an equation using these numbers to describe population growth, say, in the United States? Just adding and subtracting. What sorts of things would you add? Which ones of these things mean people are increasing? Excellent. Fertility and immigration. So if we want to figure out how many people are in the United States, we'd add births and population increase, right? So immigration. And what would we take away from that? Excellent. Yeah. Mortality and emigration. People dying and people leaving. And so what that means is that when you develop an equation for population growth in a country, as Haley just said, you sum the positives and you subtract the negatives. What can we do, though, to simplify this equation if you're talking about that population clock I just showed you, population on Earth? Is there anything we can take away from this? Yeah, excellent. People aren't leaving Earth in meaningful and lasting numbers, nor are they coming into Earth that we know of. So when you're talking about Earth, you're simply talking about the proportion of births to a population minus the deaths. And you see what's been going on through much of history has not been a problem. Because here we are 10,000 years ago going up to today, population growth has been very, very, very slow growing. But we are experiencing exponential increase in population. So what that means is that you lead to a curve similar to this, or this really, that shows that by the year 2100, what's going to happen. We have some rather disturbing harbingers of what's going to happen in 2100, and we'll talk more about that. I sent you a reading, by the way, for tonight this morning. I just sent it. So you see this title is not human population growth. You see this title is a penny or $1 million. And maybe some of you have heard this before, but it is kind of interesting to think about this question as a proxy for exponential increase in population growth, because I think just by hearing that, you may or may not get a feel for the power, and seeing this graph, you may not get a feel for the power. So the question is, would you rather have $1 million right now, I'll give you $1 million right now, take it and go, or would you rather have a penny? And every day I'll give you a penny for 30 days, so most months that's less than a month. I'm going to give you a penny every day for 30 days, but I'll double it. So I'll meet you anywhere you want. I'll give you your 1 penny, 2 pennies, 4 pennies, 8 pennies, 16 pennies, 32 pennies, 64 pennies. And we're at 7 days, and we have 64 pennies. And you add those previous ones, you're, I think, roughly at $1, right? 64, 32. So you have $1 after 7 days. Would you rather have, or would it be more profitable to have this penny doubled for 23 more days, or would it be more profitable to have the $1 million? This is what's going on with human population. Any ideas what you'd have? You get to keep the previous pennies. What would you have? No idea? So it turns out the penny's much more profitable, to the tune of about more than $9 million. You would have $10,737,418.32. If you don't believe me, take out your calculator and try it. So this is something that underscores the fact that human population is increasing at a terribly unsustainable rate. So again, this is a population clock, the thing I showed you before. So let's look at this again, and we'll think about the question to end the semester: when is this going to end? And how is this going to end? Are we going to get to a point where we're standing shoulder to shoulder, 3 people deep? What will happen to cause that number, the big number, to stop going up so quickly? Yeah?
Was it like China already putting in regulations for like how many children you're allowed to have?
So good. That's a little bit of absolutely right, absolutely, and that's a little dated. I'm glad you said that, because, for example, and we don't get into this so much in this class, it's the stuff of Geoscience 1, but China was faced with this exponential increase, and their government implemented fairly what human rights organizations would consider draconian population control mechanisms. So if you had 1 child, you got huge tax credits and benefits. If you have 2 children, you have to pay all the money back. If you have 3 children, you have a mandatory abortion and sterilization. And again, human rights organizations thought this was an egregious sin. So the situation, though, is that China, because of this, largely, has way reined in population growth and has developed at a much more expedited rate than, say, its sort of neighbor relative to us, India. India was in the same situation and implemented some other population control mechanisms that were seen really largely as a failure. And China right now is a very, very wealthy nation, right? Some people are saying that China kind of owns us. We're a colonial nation. We're now exporting raw materials to China. So China was very successful at reining in population. That caused the per capita income to increase, and they went through an expedited industrial revolution, and they are, kind of replacing us as a superpower, many would say, in a way that India did not. And India is in the opposite situation. It's in a world of hurt. It's just heartbreaking to look at what goes on in India. Indian government can't provide jobs for fully half the population. The per capita income is about $5 to $7 US per day in that country. Huge, huge misery, exponential increase in population, and it's a bad situation. Certainly there are good news stories in India, but it's not good. So with regards to that, China was it this year? Anyone know about this? It was just this year, lifted the one-child policy, and I remember people that study this in classes were saying, oh gosh, does that mean they're going to exponentially increase again? Is it going to go out of control again? Well, no. Why do we say that? What's the difference between children in an industrializing country, developing country, and children in a developed country with regards to money? Children in industrializing countries, developing countries, agrarian societies, are a source of income and a source of wealth and a source of security in an industrializing country. They can go out begging for money in the streets. They can work in what we call sweatshops. They can work in the fields. They can haul water. They can haul firewood. They promote their family's bottom line. The more children you have, the richer you are. And then also, it tends to be in an industrializing country. You don't have things like Social Security and pension and Medicare and all of those things. So the more children you have, the more likely you are to be taken care of in your old age when you're no longer able to work. So let's then look at this in an industrialized country. When is the last time any of you contributed in a meaningful way to your parents' bottom line? Have you given your parents lots of money? Have you helped with your parents' bottom line? Are you a sucking drain of financial resources? It's probably the latter, right? And that turns out to be a good thing from a population point of view. Certainly not trying to make you feel guilty, but the thing is, your parents, probably many of them, can't afford to have 18 kids or 15 kids, right? Because you need braces and you need ballet lessons and you're going to a fabulously expensive college and you have all these things. So what that does when you industrialize is you lower the birth rate by having a population be wealthier, more urbanized overall, more educated population is reined in. And it's not the case in an industrializing country. So let's go back. You see this number still going up, going up. We're almost at 4.5 billion, 7.5 billion. So the question is, when will this stop? And what will be the mechanism by which it stops? And what is the bottom line number? Yeah. How high can we go? That's the stuff of these computer models. Remember, we talked about computer models with climate change. Again, these are more well constrained in many ways, but in other ways, they're still kind of open for margin of error. Some computer models that we do say that we have already, as a world, overshot our carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is a concept borrowed from biology. That means the maximum number of individuals an environment can support. And you can apply this to mold on a piece of bread. So if you have a piece of bread and you've touched it, there's mold on it, right? For a while, population goes crazy, the mold covers the bread, but then eventually the mold runs out of both substrate, space, because there's too much other mold there, and food, because the bread is being eaten up by the mold, and the population will crash. Rabbits in a field, there's all these classic studies on how many rabbits can be supported by a field, and then the predators come in. So when we're talking about human population on Earth, what is the highest number? What is our carrying capacity? Pessimistic models, as you'll see, have placed it at 6 billion. So we have, according to the most pessimistic models, overshot the maximum number of individuals Earth can support by 1.5 billion. I've seen other computer models that show that we can support 100 billion on Earth. So that's a big difference, right, between, oh gosh, we're already on borrowed time. Usually what happens with a population is they do overshoot their carrying capacity. Then there's some sort of crash, whether it be from disease or famine, whatever, and then it will hover around its carrying capacity. Many cases, maybe not with humans. So this is a tough notion to grapple with. What is the maximum number of individuals that Earth can support? World Bank, one of the many people or places working on this, we'll also talk about Club of Rome, says our population globally will most likely stabilize at 23 billion. So we go grow, and then stabilize. So that's a good, fairly well-respected number. Again, these are some other numbers. 100 billion, I've seen 200 billion, again, in some way positive estimates. What is the answer to this? Why are these so different? Excellent, absolutely. So we have two things. So if you didn't hear that, genetic modifying of food and technology. We have two things that really we need to think about going into this. First of all, our natural resources, and we'll look at that in a minute when we look at one of these models. But then we have to look at how we use the natural resources. And in Geoscience 1, we talk about how there's enough energy in the head of a pin to fuel the city of Boston's energy needs for a week without any pollution. Take hydrogen, turn it into helium, and yeah, the hydrogen turn into helium, release a huge amount of energy, and you have no pollution. We just haven't figured out cold fusion yet. But if we do, kind of happy, because we no longer have to use up huge amounts of fossil fuels and contribute to climate change. So that's one thing. And this is, I'm telling you right now, you don't have to memorize these, you won't have to be responsible for these on the exam, but there are resources that are on Earth. We are really in the grip of the non-renewable resources, energy and mineral resources. We are mostly using fossil fuels, both in this country and globally, coal, oil, natural gas. We talked about them during the last topic, and they're going away. And we're using more than ever before because we're increasing our energy diets, but also we're exponentially increasing people, right? And each person uses a certain amount of energy. There are also mineral resources. The United States, for example, you heard of this if you took Geoscience 1. The United States keeps a list called the United States Strategic Minerals List. And it's a list of minerals, copper, lead, zinc, chromium, platinum, that without which a steady supply into our economic system and our society will be significantly negatively impacted. So I teach this class called Alternative Energy. Why aren't we there yet? And the students, start out all happy. Oh, everybody can just have photovoltaic cells, and we can have these new technologies where there's all sorts of alternative energy. And the bad news is, the technologies are using, in a less consumptive way, but using mineral resources that we don't have enough of. We don't have enough of the minerals that go into certain photovoltaic technologies to give everyone them. We'll run out of these things. So we have these resources, different countries using different amounts of them. You can see here, an American person is responsible per capita for 23 times the aluminum that a person in Mexico is responsible for using. Again, these are just some numbers so you can get a feel for this. The Japanese use 9 times the steel of a Chinese person, but I put this up because this is changing rapidly. Because Chinese development has gone on at an unprecedented rate. They're going to be using more as they fabricate things, so that'll change. Canadians top the world, as you can see, in per capita energy consumption. It's funny, I was talking to my mom about this when I was writing this lecture. Saturday, I was on the phone with her, and I read that. I said, Mom, did you know that Canadians top the world in energy consumption? She said, no, I had no idea. So a couple days later, I got this envelope in the mail from her. It's the only one I know that reads the newspaper on paper and then mails it instead of sending links on email. And it was this article in her local paper about this huge marijuana bust in Canada. They had rows and rows of greenhouses. They were pretending they were growing food, and they had heat and lights and all sorts of things. They were growing marijuana. So she just wrote at the top, here's why, which is not really why. It's a colder climate. But it's interesting to know that, Canada has a huge amount of energy use, and that's causing non-renewable resources to dwindle. And also making for interesting political relations. You see this all day, every day, the political relations that result from the use of fossil fuels. Who has it? Who needs it? How can we get it? Fracking. Okay, now we have a domestic source. Yay, we don't have to rely on other countries with, shall we say, fragile political ties or fraught political ties. But now, we're polluting our groundwater. Maybe we should go get it over there. So these are big questions. A person in Switzerland uses 40 times the overall natural resources of a person in Somalia. So what do we have to do to preserve resources? What are some things we can do? 2 things we can do. We can stop using resources, right? Do people want to do that? Do you want to be told that you can no longer use energy? Can no longer buy iPads, iPhones, whatevers? People are pretty reluctant to lower their standard of living once they've achieved it. Very difficult to go sort of back in time, right? Geoscience 1, which is environmental stuff. I say, oh, okay, who wants to save Earth? And everybody's hand goes up the first day of classes. And I say, I know how to save Earth. You with me? Yeah, everybody's with me. Yeah, we're all going to save Earth. We're going to make it sustainable. And I say, okay, everyone bring your iPhones and your laptops and your iPads up here. You can't use those because there are natural resources there. And you're going to have two outfits. You're going to have your fall-winter outfit, and you're going to have your spring-summer outfit. And when it gets dirty, you're going to go down to the Chestnut Hills Reservoir and sort of beat it against a rock with a stick. You're not going to use detergent because that will pollute the water. And we're not going to use hot water because that uses energy resources. And I hope nobody that you know lives far away, because the only way we're getting around is by walking. We're only going to eat stuff that's around here, so I hope you develop a taste for squirrel and for acorns. You know, hands are going down, right? What seems to be a great thing, we're going to save Earth, we're going to preserve natural resources, we're going to totally eliminate pollution, is not so palatable once you realize the way that you have to live. We've achieved a standard of living, we want to keep it, right? And there are ways to deal with that using technology, but the bottom line is this population clock, which is in the screen behind this, is continuing to tick up, 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 ever up. So we don't want to lower our standard of living. Very difficult. By the end of that question, I think one or two people's hands are up who are enviro-zealots, shall we say, who I do believe would live that way. But most of the rest of us, including me, don't want to live that way. So we have to then figure out how to stop exponential population increase. And that's stuff that you guys have to deal with. This may seem like a departure from our environmental geoscience class, but it's not. This could be the thing that perhaps kills more people than any of the other disasters that we've talked about. Why? Because we have a carrying capacity. We haven't figured it out yet, but we have one. Let me show you this graph. It should mean nothing to you right now. You see a bunch of squiggly lines, right? But once we look at all of these lines, you'll see what could happen. And this is the stuff, thanks to Austin, who's a classmate of yours, for sending me an article that was just published, I think, 2 weeks ago, that is brilliant. So that's your last reading in the class. It kind of shows the second half of this graph. So here we have, on the y-axis, nothing. So this is kind of a relative thing. On the x-axis, we have from 1900 to 2100. This was a model that was done by the Club of Rome. I'll show you an updated article later, in the 1970s. Why am I showing you such an old study? Well, because remember what I said with climate change. When you make a model, you have to hold out some data, and you have to figure out how well it predicted what you were trying to predict. So I'm actually going to show you this. This is done in the 1970s. I'm going to show you when they revisited it last year, what happened. So let's look first at population. This is what we're looking at, right? This is human population as a potential disaster. So we're going to look at the red line and the blue line. Exactly what we've been talking about. Population has been low. Population is now exponentially increasing. Each person is responsible for a certain amount of resources, and those resources vary by country and where you are with your industrial revolution, but each person uses a certain amount of resources. So it stands to reason that as population rises, the resources, overall total resources we have available to us on Earth, is going to go down. So you see the resources are going down as population rises. Population, second slide we saw, is simply adding up the birth rate and the death rate. So now you see those two other ones up there. And as I said, we're not having the skyrocketing birth rates. We don't have to rein in birth rate. Birth rate, yes, there are some countries that have more births than they should, but there's a big problem in many countries, some places in Eastern Europe, Japan, for example, huge problem with underpopulation, with having too few people reproducing themselves. The Japanese culture is the oldest culture, population rather, in the world. People aren't reproducing there, and it is said that Japan needs about 60,000 immigrants to cover the basics of their labor workforce per year. But they have a cultural taboo against genetic pollution. They want to keep Japan Japanese. And so there are going to be big problems in Japan as a result of plummeting birth rates. So there are different things going on, but you see the birth rate has been lowering Here we are, 2016. Death rate, though, is going down faster than the birth rate. So here's the irony. The things that make for good life quality, nutrition, medical care, all sorts of things that are lowering infant mortality rates and that are elongating the life expectancy of a human, are the things that are lowering the death rate. And when you add the birth rate, subtract the death rate, you get a situation where population is increasing. So here we are in 2020 pretty much. Population is increasing because the death rate's going down faster than the birth rate, so therefore resources are going down. We live in a wonderful time with regards to food. And largely because of the Green Revolution, right? Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, we are very, very good at feeding the world. Yes, there's a question of uneven distribution. We've talked about famines, but overall, bottom line is, we have way more food than people to eat it globally, and we have for this whole graph. So again, here we are, we have way more food than people to eat it. Industrial output, that's stuff. That's your clothes, your iPhone, your cars, your pencils, anything that we make. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have been making things, and we've been for the last while in a very, very good period of time where we have more stuff than we have people to consume it. I was, again with the phone, and just never pick up the phone. I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and picked up, she called. She said, "Do you need a toaster?" "No, why?" "Toasters are 2 for $10 at Walmart." No, I don't need a toaster. That's unconscionable, right? The natural resources that go into making a toaster, bringing a toaster from where it's assembled to where it's consumed, taking up the shelf space, all of that, 2 for $10. We are preposterously good at making things. But when you're making things using non-renewable energy and mineral resources and distributing them using non-renewable energy and resources, you see that resources are going to plummet. We are now in a time, again, where your friend can call you up and ask if you want a $5 new toaster. Associated, so the last line here, associated with resource use is pollution. When you dig up stuff, when you burn stuff, you create pollution. There's a little lag time between when you make it and when the pollution makes its way into the environment. So again, 2020, here we are. And there is a strong desire, maybe a need, for people, especially people in a comfortable society such as ours, to think where you are living now, how you are living now is the way you're always going to live, is the way your children are always going to live, and your children's children are going to live. However, let's now look at the second half of this graph, and you see that a slightly more sinister picture unfolds. So going forward, here we are again, 2020 more or less. What happened? Well, the death rate goes down, down, down. Birth rate goes down, down, down. Population exponentially increasing, using up natural resources. And you see when you get to about 2025, not that long from now, right? We're not talking about a doomsday 2,200 year scenario. We're talking about, less than 10 years from now. What happens is population outstrips resources. See, the resources are now beneath the red line. The blue line's beneath the red line. Food starts to go down. Industrial output starts to go down. For the first time, globally, we will have less food than people who need to eat it. We will have less things, industrial output, than people who need or want these things. And pollution starting to spike. And this is already happening, as you'll see in your reading. This is already happening in many other parts of the world. So globally, do we get to a situation where we say, okay, we got it, message received, Earth, we're going to stop populating Earth, and we're all just going to reproduce ourselves, or we'll sort of lower things and be fine? What's going to go on? Look at the second half of the graph. What goes on to the death rate associated with now suddenly there's famine and there may be wars over natural resources, which are already happening? What happens to the death rate? It's pretty vertical, right? The death rate goes up. Everyone who's born dies. Well, that's always the case, but we're talking bad death and pretty instant death. A lot of the babies who are born die instantly. Parents can't feed the babies. So again, do we get to a situation where, okay, we get the message, we're not going to have any more babies? No, look at the birth rate. The birth rate also goes vertical. Pretty much everyone who is born instantly dies. Parents are wanting to have a couple of kids because now we've resorted to dark age, primeval conditions where we're warring over resources. This apocalyptic doomsday scenario is unfolding. People want to have a child to help them in their old age to sort of carry on their genetic line. So we have astronomically increasing both birth and death rates, and it's only at the point where death rate swaps over birth rate. Now we have more people dying than being born. So in that population clock, deaths will start ticking off really, really, really fast, and births still really fast, but a little more slowly. That's when population will come down. Classic line, population overshooting its carrying capacity and then coming back down and staying where it should be. But what kind of a world is this that we're living in now? And again, we're talking about 2050, 60, 70. You'll still be alive, right? What sort of world are we living in? Is there any food? No food. No things. No resources left. The good news is there's no pollution because we don't have any stuff to make anymore. But that's not a good situation. Astronomical birth rates and death rates, nothing for the people that live here. So again, this was published in the 1970s when we started to really get scared about population. And we put it down for a while. We thought, oh, that's fine. It's going to just sort of not be that bad. What I just described is what population modelers refer to as the Easter Island model. So and when I say N members, I mean two extremes. I just described for you one extreme, and that extreme was resources in precipitous decline. So there's Easter Island, just for orientation purposes, off the coast of South America. There's a picture of it. Anyone know about this in the South Pacific? Easter Island's known for the Rapa Nui people. They're known for these idols. It's an island in the South Pacific. It was colonized by Polynesians about 2,500 years ago. And it was a highly evolved, if you will, civilization. Came there, they brought seeds, and they had this fabulous island. Lots of topsoil to grow food. There were palm trees everywhere, and the palm trees sort of became the base of their civilization. They would make boats out of the palm trees to go fishing for porpoises. You could make rope out of the bark. You could make houses. You could burn it for fuel and to cook, for firewood and to keep warm. The palm fronds could be the roof of your house. So the population flourished. They had all of these beautiful palm trees. They had springs everywhere, so fresh water, and they had lots of soil to grow their food. But this is a finite situation. It's an island, and it so happened that population then outstripped natural resources. Too many people cutting down too many trees means that there are not enough trees to come back the next year. When the trees were gone, you couldn't make boats for fishing. You couldn't make any fishing line to hunt porpoises. They ate porpoise. There were no trees, so there are no forests. There's no habitat. Forests are a thing, as you know from landslides, that slowly take the water into the subsurface and then release it. So there's your source of water in rivers, lakes, streams, and springs. They all dried up because the trees are gone. Water hits the bare soil and runs immediately off into the ocean. So now there's no more fresh water. And this is what happened to them. Soil eroded, crop yields plummeted, and they had a famine. And they were starving. They had gone into war with each other. There were small factions of each other that were all building these idols. And that's a whole separate topic. You can watch the Discovery Channel and see how these idols were built, how they took them from the inside of inside of the island and brought them here. They essentially thought that gods were mad at them. And so they were putting these statues up where they thought God was watching them to appease God, who was angry with them. But the way that you got these out, there's all these different theories, but essentially maybe what happened was you cut down a whole bunch of palm trees and you laid them parallel to each other and used them like rollers. So then you had this huge 8-ton statue and just people. They would sort of lay it down on these logs and push the statue along because they were excavated from the inside of the island. And then when you rolled it, it came off a log, you bring the log to the front, roll it a little more, bring the log to the front. So you cut down a bunch of trees to get this to happen. And they used coral for the eyes, so it was really, really kind of beautiful, and still is there today. Some failed ones that you can see, some that fell off the rollers, kind of neat situation. But we had, again, war, famine, cannibalism, starvation, population collapse. We found them on Easter, which is why it's called Easter Island, in 1722. And the population, which had peaked at 10,000, was now plummeted down to about 2,000. They were living under very, very primitive conditions. Again, cannibalizing themselves, warring, was awful. So this is the Easter Island model. Just as they couldn't get off their island, it's used as a proxy for human population because we can't get off our global island, and our resources are going away. There's no doubt about it. So that's the one bad model, extreme. The other end, again, we go into this a lot more in geoscience 1, but the other extreme is something called the demographic transition model, sort of the good news story. And in the demographic transition model, what happens is individual populations, and by that I mean different countries, will undergo their industrial revolution. Children will cease to be a source of income. They'll start to be a sink of income. Population naturally will be reined in, and people will live happily ever after, essentially from a sustainability point of view. And we can go into this in a lot more detail, but not in this class. You see that in some cases it has already started to happen. Here's Europe, and you see that population is on the decline. Not enough people are being born even to replace themselves. So that's not saying that's a crisis, just saying, okay, we have this exponential increase, but then we will level off. Technology will meet our needs. We can start recycling. We can start finding alternative energy sources, and we'll live happily ever after. At some carrying capacity number or beneath it, and everything will be fine. So it used to be that I would teach this class and say, you know, it could be one, could be the other, could be anywhere in between, and this is the only disaster that you have really kind of full control over as humans. This is within our grasp to make policies and to do things so that we are more towards the demographic transition model than we are towards the Easter Island model. However, go to the internet again, Smithsonian. So there's our population clock still going up as we sit here. It's going to go up long after you leave this room. Smithsonian published an article called Looking Back on the Limits of Growth. And this was published a little while ago. Here we are with the computer model. This study that I showed you, there are a couple other things in here. The study that I showed you this whole thing, was essentially a mathematical concept by the finest mind at the time in the 70s looking at population increase. And they did this graph. There's one other thing in here that wasn't in the previous one. Oh, services. So cleaning services, you know, any sort of service that you're buying it, but it's not a good. So this was created in 1970. And this little window here is our chance to see how well they did, because we have a full, complete set of data for that period of time because it's already happened. And so let's look at how they did. The blue right here is pollution. Pretty much exactly what they said was going to happen did. It's a little bit good news because it's lower than we thought it would be according to this model. The red, industrial output, also a little bit lower than we thought it was going to be. Black, population, it's a little bit higher than we thought it was going to be. So the heavy line is what actually happened. The dashed line is what they predicted. The green is services per capita. So services have been higher. We have moved a little bit into a service industry in our economic situations. Food per capita. So someone talked about food. Food per capita is the place where they did the worst. And they can explain it because in the 70s, we had no idea we were going to do genetic modification to the extent that we have. We briefly touched on it in this class, but by genetic modification of food, we have really increased the amount of food that we can produce. But you see, it's kind of coming back to meet where that is. So this is scary. Scary because they did predict these years. They predicted essentially 40 years. And so what does that mean for the future? I don't know. That's something that, you know, you have to keep kind of grappling with. But the point is, we just revisited this, and it wasn't a very happy situation. So back to the kind of end of this class, to wrap everything up, again, your reading will talk about all of the things that were in that model. It's a population last reading, just put it on as an announcement. These are small things, small text. You don't have to necessarily, you certainly don't need to know these numbers. The point is, when we're talking about hazards on Earth, these are the by rank. So these are specific disasters from the China floods down to the earthquake in Syria, the number of people who died. Again, don't need to know the details of this, just understand that disasters kill lots of people. From the Yellow River flood, 2 to 4 million. Some estimates say 5 million because remember there was also famine and disease. The more people there are on Earth, the more death there's going to be. On my list of things that I'm publishing, I'm writing a scenario where a futuristic scenario where an earthquake in China kills 1 billion people. That may sound laughable now. That's 1/7 of the human population, more or less. But given the tectonics, and in the future, with the number of people that we're anticipating being here, it's not so unreasonable. So again, this is just the number of deaths by big previous disasters, case studies. And then these are the disasters that we have talked about during the course of the semester, alphabetized. So avalanche is a type of mass wasting, but you see these are the different things that we've talked about, from heat waves to pandemics to wildfires. This is a case study. This is the number that have been killed in your average disaster. So the point is, we've talked about all of these disasters. There's exponentially more people on Earth, and then you add in climate change and the fact that there's going to be less food and ozone thinning, meaning it's going to be less productive. And who knows what the future holds, but it's going to certainly hold a lot more deaths. So sorry to end on a bad note, but there you go. There's the semester. Yeah, it's not a happy story. So I'm stopping with the presentation now, but listen for one more second, and that is Quiz Wednesday. Make sure you bring a pencil. The final exam, I wrote you an email about this. The final exam is optional. It's open book, open notes, so it is a cumulative, it's a fairly rigorous final exam. It will be done in finals period. Remember, if you take it, it counts. It has the ability to lower your grade just as much as raise it. And I have another class at BC. They are having a quiz and a final as well. So I think my office hours are going to be pretty packed. I could be wrong. But we have 15 minutes here. If anyone has questions, either as a group or an individual, I'm happy to sit here and answer any questions here. Otherwise, I'll be over my office hours at 11, and I'll see you on Wednesday. I don't know what you mean.
Okay, like this is going to be like significantly more specific or like
I don't think so. I haven't written it yet.
Yeah.
You guys wrote it, but I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not going to purposely make it really easy. I'm not going to purposely make it difficult. So I think about the same. Yeah. All right. Okay.
All right, thank
All
you.
right. Yeah. Hi.
Professor, I can talk to you about the sense of detection and action inclusion.
Yeah.
So I have a specific question. It was about human detection negative or positive.
Okay. So in positive feedback, change in one direction will lead to an amplified change in that same direction. Negative feedback is a change in one direction will lead to going back the other way. So with glaciers melting, the hotter it gets, the more glaciers melt. The more glaciers melt, the more rays are trapped. The more rays are trapped, the hotter it gets. Negative would be volcanic, the hotter it gets, clouds that are the seawater being evaporating. The more clouds there are, the more the sun's rays bounce up, the cooler it gets. So that's like a thermostat. You want negative, I know that sounds bad. You want negative because a change in one direction will keep it the way it used to be. Positive is really bad because the hotter it gets, the hotter it's going to get.
Hi. It's really quick. So my friend is professional photographer, and he uploaded this picture to Facebook, and I thought it was really neat and relative to the class. I don't know if you want me to email you, maybe you can like incorporate it in like a slide.
Yeah, I would love to see that. That's amazing. Where he's there now?
Yeah, definitely.
I would love
Yeah, I'll email you that. Maybe you can incorporate it in like a slide or something next
Absolutely.
semester. I just thought, wow, this is like awesome.
Yeah, and I showed you guys that it snowed in Cairo. It hasn't snowed since 1811 in Cairo, so yeah, changes.
It's insane. I just thought it was so neat, so I'll email that to
Well,
you.
yeah, I'd love to have it. Thank you very much.
I was just looking back over my notes on classification meteorites, and I just wanted to make sure. I know you talked about stones, stone irons, and irons come from different, I guess, pieces of the earth, right? And I
So
was-
not meteorite, so I mean asteroid, big
Right.
asteroid that differentiates, and then it gets cracked apart by a comet, and the stuff that's iron is from the middle, the stuff that's stony is from the outside, and stony irons are halfway in between.
okay. So iron is the
Middle.
middle, stone is the outside.
Outside, and it's like core mantle crust of Earth, but it's an asteroid.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So what did I say about it? Is there? Sorry.
You did not. Oh, you mean like the guidelines, or I would never go to response line.
Okay. Let me go to.
I can't make fun of you because I did almost break my ankle during the basketball tournament. So
It always happens to someone.
I just
Roommates tore his ACL.
Savage, both like
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It might have been that.
win though, so it's like, it was worth it.
Because I did it here, so it may have been that I didn't hit return or something to save it, so let me get that on while you're here, because,
Thank you very much.
and I'm sorry, I got that email when I was driving, and it's probably buried under 30 trillion other emails that have come in, so,
Oh, no problem at all.
good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome, sorry about that.
What's the cutoff for gold?
this graph, like, why is it that, I remember you mentioning that if it was flat, you wouldn't have.
Oh, yeah, good question. So we would have it, so the gray stuff, or the tan stuff, that's the impermeable layer, there would be flat sandstone underneath it, and we would have it, but it would be such a thin layer going on so far that you wouldn't be able to pump it.
Oh,
So
but
it
this is
would layer,
concentrated.
but when you go like this, then everything over a large area comes right up under that. So good question, yeah. We would have it, but it would be unpumpable.
And this up here, that's really what you see to understand.
Yeah,
that
because,
that's
so it's gone up
available,
like this, right? So if the land surface is where my elbows are, it's gone up like this. Erosion preferentially weathers away the high points, so it would be eroded down this way. So those layers are dipping like this, and you'd see an up-dipping layer cut off, so it looks like a meteorite crater.
So that's basically, because obviously, from our perspective, you wouldn't see these layers.
Exactly.
So when we're above ground, that's what you look for.
Yeah, geologists look for something that looks like a crater, and if it's that, then you know that it's there.
And then just, this was a question about the techno fixes. So we went through a bunch of these kind of quick